Street Fighter has always blended realism with anime-like proportions, and I think that Street Fighter 6's continuation of this art style was pretty beautiful. I mean, the game looks fantastic in stills, but it looks truly amazing in motion, especially when I can see my waifu Zangief. However, this video isn't about how the game looks normally. Instead, we're going to be using the power of the almighty FreeCam to explore the game's maps to see what goes on behind the scenes. I've spent a lot of time flying through not only every level in the game, but also the menus and the battle hub, so there is a lot to cover. By the way, I feel compelled to say that this video is inspired by She Says' Boundary Break series, a series of videos where he freecams games to show you what goes on outside of the player's normal vision. Another note of importance is that I won't be covering World Tour mode, and this is because I really couldn't find anything worth documenting outside of a few funny references to previous Street Fighter games, but even then you can see these while running around the game normally. Without further ado, let's begin by uncovering the off-camera secrets of Street Fighter 6's menus. Let's begin with the Fighting Ground menu. The background wall itself exists in an empty void, but the lights that are being projected onto the wall exist off-camera. I'm not a game development expert, so I could be wrong, and if someone knows the answer to this, please leave it in the comments, but I assume that this is because in order for something to be projected onto a surface, you need it to exist somewhere else for said projection to take place. Moving on to the character select screen, we can see that there is a lengthy hallway of sorts behind where the camera is normally placed. This hallway goes on for a while, and there is a surprising amount of detail contained within this area. I was expecting it to abruptly end right where the camera is placed at, or for there to be no textures at all back here when you've made it to the character select screen, but you can see that while pretty dark, this area is fully textured and rendered. Another thing that interested me was how characters interacted with the environment when you select them. So for example, the top tires that E-Honda is using to train fall out of the map, and the tire that Yuri is balancing on also goes outside of the map. As for the walkout screen, you can see that this area is quite small, but the clever use of camera angles makes it seem much larger when you see it normally. The Versus screen is also just the background in an empty void. The character intros also work like how they do in other fighting games, meaning player 1 has their intro, then they disappear, player 2 has their intro, player 1 reappears, and then the fight begins. Character wind poses act the same, and an example of this is Aki's wind pose. Normally, she straddles the enemy before dealing an implied fatal blow to their skull, but the game actually gets rid of the character who's lost when the camera changes to be directly facing Aki during the wind pose. Characters teleporting around is also an extremely common tactic that fighting games use during their cinematics. You can have a character look amazing when you see how their cinematic is supposed to look, but moving the camera around and seeing how the game manipulates their proportions and positioning is kind of charming, and it shows how the game developers truly understand the power of the camera. Speaking of characters, let's make that our next point. More specifically, let's go over their super combos for now. Most moves in the game do not involve dynamic and moving camera angles, except for command grabs and other visually important moves, so the camera usually stays locked in place throughout the course of a match. Ryu's level 3 is a great example, as the characters fly all over the place with large, screen-filling VFX. Speaking of VFX, the lights behind Ryu are from a simple square outline strategically placed behind him to give the illusion that the entire background is morphing with his very powerful Shoryuken. If we pull back even further, we can see that the super takes place inside of a really dark void that controls the lighting, and that the entire map turns a crimson red to add emphasis to the strike. Another example of this is Zangief with his level 3 super. The screen also turns red, but you can see a large light source used to illuminate the scene from above, as well as more character teleporting. Zangief's big SPD at the move's conclusion also sends him flying super high into the air, almost out of the dark dome surrounding his immediate surroundings. Look, I can't cover every single super in the game as it would take forever, and you get the point, so let's move on to the characters themselves. As this is a very modern game running on next-gen hardware, it goes without saying that the characters have lots of detail. Street Fighter 6 runs on Capcom's very own RE engine, and as such, the characters feature realistic muscle movements as well as other lifelike qualities. Ryu's face has a lot of realistic detail that is different depending on which angle you see his face from. Chun-Li's makeup, most noticeably her eyeshadow and moles, can be seen, and E-Honda, who is my favourite close-up, literally has a spark in his eyes. His face paint also looks like it was painted on by hand, meaning that the painting isn't perfect. Overall, characters have lots of realistic detail in Street Fighter 6 when you take the camera up close, but what arguably has more detail are the stages. First up is one of my favorites, Metro City Downtown. The best way to think about this stage is to imagine a city with only one fully realized area. This is where the fight takes place. Everywhere else is either off camera or it's way off in the background, so it requires a lot less detail. A major point of interest to me is that normally in fighting games, especially something like Street Fighter 4, if you flip the camera around 180 degrees, the out of bounds area is simply left unfinished, so it's just a black textureless void of nothing. Street Fighter 6, however, has fully modeled stages. To begin, let's look at where the fight takes place. This stage is overall pretty colourful, and one reason for this is the neon sign on the top right part of the map. We can also see some NPCs modelled after Poison and Hugo on the right, and Crusher Damned from the game's story mode is also present on the left. Flying throughout the city shows us that while the map contains some detail, the texture quality and geometry complexity is quite low, which makes sense. The sky is also completely white, which we can see from the regular camera angle, but what interested me the most was the two cars outside of the map. I believe they're from World Tour mode, and I could be wrong here, but I think that at some point during the fight you can actually see these cars speeding off in the background, which explains their off-camera starting position. Next up is Carrier Byron Taylor, Guile Stage. This map may seem huge, but in reality it's a combination of clever camera placement and your mind filling in the blanks. While it does admittedly look pretty impressive, there isn't a whole lot going on in the stage. Most of the NPCs are pretty low quality to save on resources, the Matchbox car driving in the back goes from point A to point B forever on a loop, and once you see the planes in the back, you realize that this is literally it. The skybox has simply been mirrored underneath the map to give the illusion that we really are in the sky, and I found it funny how there's nothing on the sides of the carrier to prevent people from falling off. However, the elevated portion of the carrier is the main attraction, as most of the stage's little details went here in my opinion. Doors have unique numbers, there are lots of flags travelling to and from the top portion, and the Go Guile flag is my favourite of the bunch. Following this is Thunderfoot Settlement, Lily Stage. What's immediately obvious is how colourful the stage is, and it's one of my favourites because of this. If we turn the camera around, we can see that there are numerous palm trees and caravans with graffiti on them, as well as some extra off-screen foliage. The main attraction, however, is in the background of the regular camera placement. It's mainly just more caravans, but we can see a low-quality sign advertising what I assume is some kind of diner, these large utility poles, and lots of buildings in the background. This area is obviously very low quality, but it makes sense since it's so far away in the back. What impressed me the most is that this entire area here is modelled and rendered completely. There is not a single spot where the map just jarringly ends. The fourth stage is Barmely Steelworks, Zangief Stage. This is one of the smaller ones, as the major and only point of interest, to me at least, is the submarine in the back that is being suspended in the air. There aren't that many NPCs in the background, and they also aren't doing anything interesting, but what I did like are the large lava vats emitting steam throughout the map. This map feels really hot and stuffy and claustrophobic, and the pretty warm lighting goes a long way in selling this feeling. Bathurst Beach, I think is how you pronounce it, is the fifth stage, and this belongs to DJ. This stage is also completely rendered, and I believe that the reason for this, and some of the other stages too, is that they appear in the cutscenes in World Tour mode, so they needed to be fully realized. The beach itself is quite simple, and while it does have some gorgeous lighting and ambience, the stage is also pretty basic overall. Going underneath the water reveals a layer of sand, and the reddish-purple lighting reminded me of Iron Lung. Going inside of the maximum bar, we can see the interior sign reads Coconut, and there's an area where the hypothetical bartender can enter to grab more drinks. There's also some fruits laid out here, and honestly, I'd like to go here and hang out with DJ. Next up is Ranger's Hut, Blanca Stage. Due to this stage also appearing in World Tour cutscenes, it's quite detailed in areas that you would have never normally seen during a regular match. The main point of interest is the snake, and if you don't like snakes, look away for a bit because I will be moving the camera close to it. We can see that its face textures are pretty simple, especially its eyes. It's very flat, very plain. Our snake friend doesn't have much going on with his skin, but the tree he calls home has some pretty good detail to it. I'm not exactly sure what these things are called, but there are a few of them scattered throughout this area, and I really love the no swimming sign towards the bottom of the match area. The water goes out for a while, but it jarringly ends after a certain point. What also caught my interest are the giant waterfalls in the back, so you know I had to check them out. Unsurprisingly, these contained very little detail, but they are fully modelled from front to back, so they're not just 2D. Now let's look at King Street, Kami Stage. What interested me the most were the trains that travel across the map, so I checked out their travel paths. It's not terribly intriguing, but as they simply travel when they're on screen, they keep traveling for a bit when they leave the camera's view, and then they just disappear. If we move the camera towards the background, we find an area that is covered in fog, kind of like Silent Hill, and then we also see that this map is pretty large. It goes almost endlessly, and while the buildings are essentially copy-pasted to fill space and to hide the simple geometry, it still looks pretty nice. Feet for Rain is up now, and this is Manon Stage. This is my favourite stage in the game, simply because the music is awesome and there's also lots of stuff going on. If we inspect the merchants, we can see that they, as well as the mother and child NPC, have their own scripted pseudo-conversation. While the kid isn't actually shooting at anything, it's still awesome that they went to the detail to animate this. We can also see the NPCs on the right side of the stage inspecting this food store to see what they like to eat, but the most important assets in this map are the Rollercoaster and the Eiffel Tower. The former travels endlessly on a set path, sort of like the Rollercoaster in Jet Set Radio Future. Due to the harsh lighting of this map, it's almost impossible to see the Rollercoaster at times, but I've done my best to show it off. The Eiffel Tower stands high and mighty as it's illuminated by an orange glow that adds emphasis and helps it to stand out. This thing is huge, and while the topmost portion is completely black, the rest of it is nicely detailed, if not a bit simple. My favourite part of the stage, however, is the carousel. These NPCs aren't animated at all, and they look like they're made out of cardboard and paper mache, so seeing them spin over and over for infinity will never fail to make me laugh. Moving on to the Colosseum Marissa stage, this is another simple one, as it's essentially a basic fighting arena with a Roman twist. The architecture here either looks phallic or like a bullet, pick your poison, and these kinds of statues are placed throughout the map. The spectating areas are filled with low quality NPCs, and while the area itself doesn't have lots of exquisite detail, it does get the job done and it looks pretty good when you're playing a match. What caught my interest the most was Lucius, Marissa's lion friend. It's hard to get a good look at him due to how he moves, but his golden faceplate and headdress look amazing. He's also pretty cute when he's sleeping, and his mane does clip through the floor. Up now is Ryu's stage, Geno Temple. Behind the camera is some grey foliage, but the major point of interest is the Japanese-style architecture in the background. These extend throughout the map, and the house area, while not being super large, has some pretty nice attention to detail. The dog statues remind me of the real-life Hachiko statue in Shibuya, Japan, and the predominantly red colour scheme is emblematic of Japan, and this is a stretch, but hell, even Ryu's headband. These simply rendered trees extend as far as the eye can see, and the waterfall starts flowing out of a place of the mountain before descending into a mist. Next up is Chun-Li's stage, and I don't know how to pronounce this properly, so I won't do it. This stage contains lots of beautiful architecture, and if we flip the camera around, we can see that it actually reflects off these mirrors. Going through the area shows that the area you fight in is fully realized, it's a truly 3D set of detailed geometry, and the rest of the stage is a lot more flat and simple. When combined, they give the illusion that the stage is a lot larger than it actually is. One thing I love about this stage is the massive statue of the dragon with a turtle on its back. We can see that the water spewing from the dragon's mouth begins out of nowhere, and it turns into mist towards the end of the stream. Next up is Geno Temple, which is obviously Dhalsim stage. This stage has a set of steps that the fighters must walk up in order to reach the main area, and I believe you can interact with these in World Tour mode. My favourite part of this stage are the elephants on either side of the area. It's hard to tell because of the lighting, but I believe that they both have the same set of jewelry on them, and these look gorgeous. While the elephants' legs are pretty simple and flat, the rest of their bodies, especially their faces and their ears, are pretty detailed and lifelike. Moving the camera upwards shows us that there is indeed a light source that illuminates the area you fight in, helping to make it stand out from the rest of the map. The next stage is Oldtown Market, and this area is from Nishal, the fictional country found in the World Tour mode. Like King Street, this stage is very lengthy, and it has progressively less detail the further you go along. We can see merchants, storefronts, and what I believe to be certain kinds of monkeys, but I'm not good at identifying animals, so take what I say with a grain of salt. This area is very cluttered, especially the immediate area in front of the Safari travel store. There's not much to say about this level in terms of the background NPCs and overall complexity, because it's pretty simple. Next up is Suvohal Arena, JP stage. I love this level for the flowing red and blue banners and the wonderful artwork on the ground where you fight. Speaking of the banners, let's look at them. They begin from these giant poles and they go all the way down to the background area where this 2D character watches over the fight. This area plays a large role in the final moments of World Tour's story, so it does make sense why there's so much detail here. The mountains in the back, like other pieces of out-of-bounds geometry in this game, exist in the void, so there's nothing underneath them. I know they're still super low quality, but the sheer amount of NPCs in this stage really helps sell the feeling that this is indeed part of a major fighting tournament, especially because that's literally the purpose of this stage in World Tour mode. One minor detail I really appreciate is that on either end of the arena, you can see an area that the fighters walk out from to approach one another. The penultimate stage is the Macho Ring. It looks grand, but this is actually one of the simplest stages in the game. It's just a fighting ring with lots of spectators watching from either side. There are spectators packed very closely together all over the place, and the dark lighting towards the background makes it hard to spot them all in great detail. The ring itself is like something you'd find in MMA, and the 6 on the ground reminds me of the original logo for Street Fighter 6. Finally, we have the training room. This is by and large the simplest stage in the game. If we turn the camera around, we can see that it's fully modeled all over, but that's literally it. It is just a cube floating inside of an empty void. Moving on to the battle hub, and trust me, this won't take nearly as long as the previous section. It's been noted online before, but the battle hub is actually inside of a massive jet that's flying throughout the sky. Or at least that's what it's looked like, because I'm pretty sure that the jet is actually stationary except for its fans, which are moving. The jet itself is also, in my opinion, kind of designed pretty weirdly. It looks almost alien. It's challenging to make out detail due to the very harsh, bright lighting, but it seems to me that the jet is completely white with some darker areas here and there. It's not a super complex piece of geometry visually speaking. Going back inside the battle hub, we can see that the starting area is contained towards the interior edge of the plane, and perhaps most importantly, I'm pretty sure that the Chipotle logo is fully rendered in 3D, which is excellent. To be honest, there's not much here to discuss. Aside from the jet, you can see everything in the battle hub just by running around normally, so there aren't any pretty cool hidden details you can see only by free camming the game. Man, that was a lot. Street Fighter 6 has tons of detail hidden off camera, and if you stuck all the way to the end, I hope you enjoyed it and learned something fun about the game. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you had fun, and I'll see you in the next one.